I mean, look, we can do most wins in a single season, and we can go back all the way to the 20s, and we can just take a look at how in each decade you had heights that were unreached in 2010 to 2020. Of course, everybody remembers Byron Nelson having 18 wins in 1945. They forget that Ben Hogan, of course, had 13 wins in 1946. Sam Snead, of course, 11 wins in 1950. Arnold Palmer, 60 and 62. Had those 8 wins, and of course Jack Nicklaus in 1974 had a great run, and Tom Watson to begin the 80s with those victories. In 1999 it was Tiger Woods with 8 wins, and of course we know what B.J. Singh and Tiger did in 2000. The question is, why such the fall off in 2000? To continue that point more recently, until Bryson DeChambeau won last week, it had been 21 consecutive events on the PGA Tour without a repeat winner. Longest streak since, well, go back to 1970, so unprecedented parity there. Of course, in 2020, there were 5 players that ascend to the _1 spot. That is the most players to ever ascend to the #1 spot in the world since the world rankings began. Level upon level upon level of unprecedented parity. Of course, Bryson DeChambeau broke that by winning last week, but nonetheless, it still stands. Begs the question, why? You know, I think Justin and I will come at this from quite a few different angles, but I would argue that it is a Tiger effect. You know, we sort of fall in love with precocity, the recipe for greatness that Tiger put on display, the early specialization, the repetition, the high-intensity training, as if that is a recipe for greatness. And early specialization, certainly there is data on that it is related to and run the risk of higher injury pretty early in your career. It also, some would argue, you use the term Gladwellian, Malcolm Gladwell will argue that it leaches out the joy later on. But if we look at the players that could have, let's say, dominated, you know, Jordan Spieth, Rory McIlroy, Dustin Johnson, Justin Thomas, Brooks Koepka, and you start to look at those players, Jason Day, how many of them have been susceptible to injury? Almost all of them to some sort of injury. How many of them have sort of fallen off because some aspect of their game? Less so, but Jordan Spieth would be one of them. Justin Thomas, you would say, could have dominated, but he didn't have the complete game. But in general, dominance is the exception. Parity is the norm. Extraordinary golfers, by definition, are rare. But I think as long as junior golfers and people in general are going to try to copy Tiger Woods with the, I think, early specialization, I think it's an avenue for more parity. And I would say to that end, Tiger Woods was more of an end than a beginning.
Look, there's a tab open in this computer just to look up words that Brandel uses before and during the show. Precocity, by the way. A little bit, yeah. And then there's another tab. As I was searching parity and these kind of things, my computer asked me if you were using it because it's not used to deep searches like that from me. You know, first of all, there will never be another Tiger Woods. There'll be another athlete that comes along that, and there will be many athletes that maybe remind us of short periods, but don't try and produce another Tiger Woods because there won't be another one. To that end, you know, when I look at tennis and I think of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, 3 dominant players playing at basically the same time. I know Roger Federer's a little bit older, but they competed against each other a lot. To me, that's fascinating because it gives you a rooting interest, but yet you know you're going to see high-level tennis if 2 of those 3 make it to the finals or they meet in the quarters, the semis, whenever it is. You know, it's going to be somewhat legendary, and I think that's what we're looking at going forward. I think it's better when there is some parity.
So you think parity at the top is?
I think parity at the top, but let's have a few. I don't think it should be completely dispersed, but I think back in you know, the early 2000s when it was the Big Five. You know, you had Ernie Els and Phil Mickelson in there, and David Duval was in there for a little bit, Retief Goosen, and, you know, a couple of those guys were interchangeable. I think that's what we're looking at. I think Rory should be back in there. Justin Thomas, John Rahm, DJ, Brooks Koepka, if he gets healthy again. You know, I think there's the opportunity for a group of people to kind of carry the mantle that Tiger has carried by himself for the last 20 years.
I think it's interesting, though, about dominance is, you know, as far as I could tell, it's the only time when the game really does grow. You know, it grew parallel to Bobby Jones' success in the 20s. It certainly took off again in the 60s with Arnold Palmer's run, really from 58 to sort of 64, and then it took off again with Tiger Woods in the 90s. And at least the way I define dominance is sustained period of dominant play for 5 or more years. And when you start to look at the careers of Rory, that period from 2011 to 2014 didn't quite get there. Didn't quite get there with Spieth. Didn't quite get there with Brooks Koepka. Hadn't quite got there with Justin Thomas. Didn't quite get there with Jason Day. And to me, it just begs the question, why? Why has there has been numerous examples of players who've come along with apparent precocity, right? With apparent brilliance at a very young age, who were, you know, early specialization with the exception of Brooks Koepka. And they got on these runs and they fell off. So with each case, you think, well, why did it fall off? And, you know, certainly injury pops up. Unprecedented amount of data pops up. Unprecedented amount of influence pops up. Long seasons pop up. You know, there's, you know, complacency, certainly. That's human nature pops up.
Let me throw this out. When speed is the premium, as it is now, right? What I would call consistent playability suffers. So you're now spending much more time in the gym working out. That's crucial for speed. So maybe you spend a little less time on your short game. You're not as innovative around the greens. And then you get a little back pain, a little wrist pain, maybe some elbow pain, and now you're fighting to get speed out of a body that just doesn't want to give it to you. So in other words, to win in this game now, speed and power, you have to crank it to 220. You have to be like a Formula One car. And you, at some point, you're going to blow a gasket. You have to throttle back at some point. I think it's what the modern game calls for, and I think that's why you're seeing guys play well in shorter bursts. I don't know if you buy that theory at all.
Look at that. I mean, that's... If you would say to the degree that the game becomes more about power or speed, then you would say it becomes more about youth and less about experience. So that would shorten the window that a player would potentially have to dominate, and it would explain some drop-offs in their late 20s and 30s, which again would help explain some of the parity that we're talking about. I would just, as I have many times, just caution the intensity with which people train to seek. I know that Bryson DeChambeau is, and again, if he wins this week and he comes up here, one of the questions I'd love to ask him is to what extent he contributes his success to his metamorphosis physically or his metamorphosis technically. Because I look back at Tiger Woods and he swung faster when he was sinewy versus muscle-bound. Brooks Koepka swung faster as a rookie than he did muscle-bound. Dustin Johnson swung faster as a rookie than he did muscle-bound. To me, along the way, they look better, no doubt, in a bathing suit on the beach. But they don't swing faster because of it.
You think Bryson has a chance to be dominant? Or
I do. I do think he has a chance to be dominant, but I think when we're talking about dominance, it's not going to last for a period of years. It's going to be a period of months. And we saw that with Jason Day. We saw that with Jordan Spieth. We saw that with Rory McIlroy. I think because of the parity, there can be shorter terms of dominance. We're just not going to get those long, you know, year-long periods. I think, you know, Dustin Johnson, he was pretty dominant, but it lasted for 4 months. I'm not saying he's completely out of that. He's got a stranglehold on #1 in the world. He's leading by 4 points. But that's the kind of dominance that I think we have to, if we're going to talk about it, that's what we need to realize that we're looking at here for the next, you know, bunch of years.
You said there'd never be another Tiger Woods. You think there'll ever be another dominant player?
I think the dominance is shorter run. I don't think you're going to see a dynasty. I don't think you're going to see a 5-year run. I think it's going to be a year, maybe even 4 or 5 months, where somebody can tick off 3, 4, 5 events. And then all the things that we talked about that play into it. Life gets in the way, equipment, injuries, those kind of things are going to play into, you know, you're not going to have that really sustained dynasty in one player.
And with the internationalization of this sport, I mean, the competition, as you guys know, it's just insane right now. I mean, they're coming from everywhere, and they're training, and they're doing everything to gain an advantage. So it's hard out there. That's an understatement.